What you don't realize as a caregiver, though, is you might have had anticipatory grief. So, but you don't understand because you are going to try till the very last moment that you're laying on the floor and you say, I am weary, God, help me. I can't do this anymore. And that's where I was. So I had to acknowledge physically that I was tapping out.
I'm Carolyn Berry of Alzheimer's Arkansas, and thank you for joining this month's episode of I Did Not Sign Up for This. We are going to dive into the complexities and challenges of being a caregiver to someone with Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia. This is just not about the disease. This is about the caregiving experiences, the challenges, the mishaps, the miscommunications, and understanding of how this disease affects families, communities, and our society as a whole. I am so excited about this month's guest, Theba Lolley. She is such an inspiration to me and to many others in her caregiver journey, as well as just in her personal life. We're going to talk about her caregiving experience and some grief. This month is Thanksgiving, and next month we're going into the Christmas holidays and other holidays, and we'll talk about grief just a little bit. And thank you to Elder Independence Home Care for sponsoring us, and let's start. Theba, thank you for being here today to share your story on my podcast. I did sign up for this.
It's a pleasure and a privilege to be here with you, Carolyn.
So, Theba, tell me a little bit about your caregiving experience.
Well, Mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's in 2017, but we had seen some changes, or I must say I saw some changes that were alarming to me probably several years prior to that. With the diagnosis, it became obvious that it was more than cognitive memory impairment, so I kind of set the course of being her full-time caregiver while I was still working, and I could, but I saw some changes that made me realize that I was not comfortable with her being alone at the house. And mainly they were changes like I was afraid of who she'd let in the door.
And so I'm going to go back with you a little bit because your caregiving experience did not start with your mother.
No, my father.
Your father. So you've had some years experience. So what year did you actually start caregiving for your father, who had a different type of dementia?
I started caring for him full-time, moving him here in 2017 from Alton, Illinois, and he and Mother were diagnosed at the same time.
And his diagnosis was?
Dementia Lewy body. When he moved here, I just understood that he had Parkinson's. I just thought that was a motor problem. And so I realized that him teaching tennis was beginning to be a struggle, but at the same time, I just again chalked it up to cognitive memory impairment. He was really getting more confused about, he was late paying bills, he was asking questions that seemed, So, but not yet did I even think that he had anything like that disease. So when we got him here, I really saw some changes. And I got him an apartment close by to where I was living with Mom. And so I was like, I'm going to do this. I'm just going to go swing by his place every morning, go to work, swing back by and check on him. But the changes were more alarming. No, I just felt like, I tried to teach him certain things. I was trying to teach him stuff, like normal stuff. And I realized he wasn't feeding himself. And I was like, whoa. So then I started caregiving. I started hiring caregiver because I was still working.
So a unique part of the dynamics is your parents were divorced.
Yes.
For a long time.
Yes.
And you brought your father here, and then you had your mother here, and they were diagnosed at the same time.
Yeah, I took them both at the same time. And he very quickly told us that Dad had dementia Lewy body and Mom was Alzheimer's.
Oh,
so,
and you must have really didn't sign up for that. I mean,
No.
most of us don't really think about that. even if both parents get it, that it's going to be like the same time.
Well, and prior to their diagnosis, I was still in denial a little bit, meaning I was hopeful that it would not advance. So, you hear stories of like sometimes cognitive memory impairment may not advance to dementia. I'm like, oh, that's going to be one of them or both of them. And so I was on the fast track to learning quickly about that's kind of how I'm wired anyway, is what am I dealing with? Who do I need to get in contact with? Knowledge is empowering. It's not going to solve all the issues, but it certainly is helpful. So that's how I got involved with you and other
Yes.
people in the industry or the organizations that help people with Alzheimer's.
And sometimes, I get this question all the time about, like how long do people live with the disease? So your father's disease process journey was about how many years,
Well,
you would say?
quickly, when he was diagnosed, it went very quickly because that type of dementia Lewy body is more aggressive.
Yes.
So got him here in 2017. He died November 1st, 2019. His symptoms, of course, started earlier. Several years earlier, we were on a trip. I could tell things were different. Again, gosh, I guess this is just old age. No experience with this because both his mother passed of natural causes. His father had cancer. Mom's father died of cancer, and her mother. So there was no talk of this kind of disease. So it was a total mystery to me.
You just said something very interesting, and I'm not going to get on my soapbox, but I might. You said, I just thought this was old age.
Yeah.
And for people listening, knowing that cognitive impairment and memory issues is not a part of normal aging. So I always say, if something is wrong, something is wrong.
Right.
Trust your gut. Because that's going to be your first key in trying to start learning, getting help, getting resources. Because I guess I would imagine if you had a known back then, at least you would like start looking for resources, like not put it in the back of your mind.
Well,
kind of.
I probably would have associated the word or the words to it a lot sooner, and probably not tried to avoid. But when I would run across articles about Alzheimer's or dementia, I would have probably read a little bit of it, a little with nervousness.
Yes.
Now, interesting, I didn't realize this because my grandmother her mother ended up dying of liver cancer, but I think she too had dementia Lewy body to a degree because she was diagnosed with Parkinson's. And because I was completely clueless in the early 2000s about any kind of disease, I now can look back, because she was living with us at the time, I can look back and go, oh, that behavior was there. That hallucinating type of behavior, that kind of, she was very aggressive, sometimes in mean-spirited, was there.
Yeah. And I'm going to say, for my knowledge, like the dementias, Alzheimer's, I'm going to say historically, like there were no names for it, right? Because I found out that my great-grandmother probably had dementia. However, they called it senile aging, or like she was senile and aging. So that was like in the 70s.
Oh, yeah,
So
my
we
mama
didn't
used
have
the word senile a lot.
Yeah, so they did not have like the vocabulary,
That's right.
the diagnosis for it, and kind of was like, okay, they get senile. So I found that out about my grandmother as well. So it is interesting that, although this disease is not new, as we do medical advances, we are learning more and more about the disease. However, we still have a lot to learn.
Well, and social media has helped
Yes.
elevate the disease in real life videos of families.
Like your transparency,
Yeah.
and how much I hear about, and families really respect the work you do and how transparent you are in your journey. So your mother's disease process lasted about how many years?
So diagnosed in 2017 with an actual official diagnosis, but the experience of her changes, I'm going to say 5 years prior to that. So that kind of normal 10-year-ish, or what I learned was really the disease starts way before the actual where a family member begins to see evidence of changes. So I can see that now. So if I go back after she retired and then wanted to do some part-time work, there was a lot of uncertainty with her, where she was a confident, strong woman. All of a sudden, there were things that she could not manage, like computer, email. And it was just like, she worked most of her life. She knows all of that. So, but now she has passed this year, September 30th. Yes. From what we say, or what I learned from you, was she didn't die of Alzheimer's, but complications of Alzheimer's. She had a blood disease, I'm assuming was caused by, that really started taking its toll on her body.
Yeah, so in the process, because I was around, and so we'll talk about grief a little bit, and this where you are, I mean, a normal place is, for so many people, we think we prepare for grief, which is what we think we are preparing for grief. So tell me about your thought of you preparing for grief, because we talked about grief a lot.
Right. Well, there were people like you and others who just kind of reminded me that you are grieving what's to come. You're grieving the loss of your mother as you know her. So I was I was aware of that. Mm-hmm. I read a really good article recently that talked about what I was experiencing, and goes from anyone who knows that their loved one's going to die of an illness, is anticipatory grief. You might have a name to it, but at the same time, you absolutely have no idea how it's affecting you because you're busy being a caregiver. So in 2021, at the end of that year, I became my mom's full-time caregiver. So I left my job to do that. So I was busy. You were over there.
Very busy, yes.
I felt very active and helpful, and anything she needed, I got. I was just on Amazon ordering things. Anytime she needed a railing, anytime she needed this. So I just think that I was aware of the effect to my body, emotions, etc., to the fact that when I was hanging out with her in the bed, I was sitting beside someone who was not going to be with me that long, though I didn't know the timetable. And so that was difficult. So I was aware I was grieving what was to come, but you're just not present enough with your own emotions. Now, I had some come-aparts, as you know. Oh. I had some times I had to go off and cry. So I did some, and I kept the conversation going with people like you, my best friend, what I was seeing, how it was making me feel. So I did talk about my feelings a lot in regards to what she was going through, especially in the last 6 months.
8 to 6 months, yes, because me coming monthly, I could almost see some things that you couldn't see. Because, it's like you can't see the forest for the trees. And family so many times, you anticipate the grief. Of course, you're grieving who they are, what they could and could not do. And the hopefulness that sometimes you get in the disease is like those good days, right?
Oh, yeah. They'll psych you out big time.
And they're very emotional because you're very happy, like they're doing something, making like strides or something.
Yeah, seem more alert, know who you are.
And
you think it's you giving them water and protein drinks, so you keep it up more and more and more because you don't have any, you feel like you're losing control. So if that's what I can do, make sure she's got the best straw, the best glass. And even though you always told me that, it's not going to change the outcome of what's coming, it's just all I had was, here, Mama, here's some protein drink, It's the only control I had. And I felt I had.
You felt you had it. And really it's the hope you have. And then, the realization, which really kick us in the gut, I guess, and realize that, and then following is a day of they sleep all day.
Yeah.
Or won't eat. not responding.
Yeah. So coupled with her blood disease and just her weirdness about eating, it's been all her life, she just stopped eating. So all we had was protein drinks. So I was like, okay, because, I would try. I'm like, Mama, and of course I would get upset. You need to eat the full cheese sandwich. And then it would get to, she would eat the full sandwich. Then she was down to half a sandwich. It was so her disease was very linear until it wasn't. So every time that, and you feel it in your gut when there's a change.
Yes.
And no one's around to talk to you about it. So I did a lot of research online. So I was able, because I didn't get the feedback that I was hoping for or asking for from the hospice nurse, great hospice nurse, but that just wasn't how she communicated. I kept good detailed notes, but I was laying beside somebody that was having some very significant physical changes, not just not eating. Of course, that made her weight just drop, but other things that I was like, that's interesting. So once the process, or I guess the transition, and I didn't know the word.
Yeah, transitioning. We talked about that.
Yeah, and you're right. There were high days, and then the low days were like 3 or 4 in a row, and I was like, this is it. Oh, my goodness. And I'd have my come apart, my cry fest, and then she'd bounce back. And so it messes with your psyche.
It messes with your psyche. So I want to touch on eating just for a few more seconds, just because that is, we're from the South, because, we eat everywhere. And, eating is, healing to us. Food is healing. So when our loved ones get to the point where they're not eating, we just almost want to force them, because we if we just could get some nutrients.
That's right.
Them. And talk about how you came to the realization of how counterproductive, or that was not going to change.
Yeah, well, that was you during a podcast that we had at my house, and when we would have lunch together, and we would just kind of talk naturally, because I knew I was obsessed with that. And I had a really awesome therapist that towards the end was like, Theba, you don't want your relationship to be about her drinking her protein drink, because she was starting to get frustrated with me. Not angry, not mean-spirited, but I could tell. I got that mama look from her. And so, and I think I started to panic because she was sleeping a lot more during the day. So I wasn't able to get her as many protein drinks or water. So I had that in the back of my mind, you telling me this is not going to change the outcome. This is part of the process. It just is counterintuitive. And so if she woke up, I was so holding myself down, don't jump up and make this about her drinking. That she's going to, every time you get up, she's going to roll her eyes at you, which she would do. So I settled down on that reality. And so that was the more significant process is her, of course, sleeping all day, because that was unusual. And then those days where it seemed like she was so exhausted. She was so tired and unable to stay awake, and she wanted to. So that bothered me as well. I was like, So I started settling in a more healthy way for her and me to not be about my relationship. And I think you probably said this, and I'm not sure you said it this way, but my therapist did as well. She said, don't make your relationship about being a nurse. She needs a daughter. So I needed to find a really good balance.
And I also told you needed a mother. You didn't need her to be your patient at the end. You needed to.
Yeah, you told me that when I felt like it, go lay my head on her shoulder, because I needed a mom, and I did. Mm-hmm. And so that was helpful. It didn't make me feel like I was giving up. It made sense to me, because she wanted her daughter. And most of the time she knew who I was. I would say 90% of the time.
She did.
And there would be times, and the thing is I still think she knew who I was.
And
but
even
she
when
thought
she
I was
called
her
you your
sister.
It was still a connection of love there. Not I don't know who you are.
Yeah.
it was a connection of love. She always connected you with somebody she loved. So
Yeah.
she knew
Oh,
that. She
and
knew
she
that
loved her sister.
yeah.
And I'll tell you, so, you probably have another question because I could go on, but
And like this does not happen quite often. Sometimes it does. And she loves to be called Barbie. But she was just so sweet until, like, she was always sweet. And
yeah.
I just remember her being who she was, because, like, she was pretty, and she loved being like the pretty woman. So how she looked, if I was or anybody was coming over, was important to her. So she kept a lot of, like, who she was foundationally, and of course with God, who she was
Yeah.
foundationally. She would talk about, does my hair look bad? And I just thought that was so important, that although with the disease, she still kept many aspects of, like, who she was as Barbie.
Yeah, her
as,
personality, her kidding around with people like
yes.
you. She loved hugging people. So, yeah, and I know I've already told you this, but she was my mom till the very end.
She was.
And there are now things I can look back on and realize that she's the opposite of me in regards that you know how I feel. It's on my sleeve. She wasn't that way. I am pretty sure that there are many times that she was protecting me from what she knew was happening to her.
But she would ask you a lot, how are you?
Oh yeah, but she was not going to have a conversation with me about the fact that she thought she was dying,
Yes.
right? Now, she did tell the caregiver who would come in occasionally, she'd go, I'm very sick and tired. I'm very tired. Now, she would tell me she was tired sometimes, but she really wouldn't elaborate because I think she was protecting me. And she knew how emotional I was. I was going to have a come apart.
How beautiful. So let's talk about, so it's been a little over a month.
Yep.
And as you prepared for grief, I'm going to say, you don't really know what grief looks like until after it happens. So talk about, like, grief right now and, like, what you've been through in the last month.
Yeah, and you can't compare the grief you feel when your grandmother died, or even when my dad died, who I loved, but he wasn't my beloved. My mother was my person. So I had an anticipation, maybe it was more of a hopeful anticipation, that I would kind of deal with that the way I had when other people passed. I think I knew it was going to be pretty dramatic, but I still had high hopes. I was like, this is going to be fine. My mother's with Jesus, and I'm going to be strong, and I've got Jesus, and this is going to be fine. But holy cow. What you don't realize as a caregiver, though, is you might have had anticipatory grief. So, but you don't understand, because you are going to try till the very last moment that you're laying on the floor and you say, I am weary, God, help me. I can't do this anymore. And that's where I was. So I had to acknowledge physically that I was tapping out. I didn't see it until that happened, right? So the first several weeks after she passed, I was dealing with exhaustion as well, and that led to being depressed. So I got some help in that area just to get my serotonin lifted up, because I was absolutely spun, and I couldn't think straight. You already have what they call grief fog in your brain, and then you've got this physical symptoms coming up. So I realized very quickly that I could not ignore what was happening, and I realized very quickly that I needed to find some support. So I did. I got online and found a great group to kind of educate me, give me tools, give me an understanding of what other people go through and what grief looks like. So that's what I did, and it has been extremely helpful. I haven't felt alone in that process.
I'm glad to hear that. It reminded me, so a good friend of mine, she lost her mother some years ago, and she said, it absolutely changes you.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to cry. Maybe I will. But so losing somebody that you're so close to, it changes you.
Yeah.
Right. The
Especially
grief is
a parent.
different. A parent, like, that's your connection to the world,
Right.
like your mother. So thank you for sharing that. And, you know, grief, as we talk about grief, look, I'm crying more than you, Theba. Going into the holidays, and I'm getting a lot of questions. So I know, because I know you, your holidays had already changed.
Right.
Yeah,
I did
so-
not feel the pressure to manufacture a holiday feeling because my mother was unaware of what the holiday was. And even if I got up and told her, I'd have to tell her every 5 minutes anyway.
Yeah.
And even if I decorated, she was pretty much not going to be walking around the house very much anymore. She
Yeah.
didn't spend a lot of time observing, let's put it that way. Even if she got up and walked around, if she passed by a little Christmas tree I put up or something of that it wasn't registering.
It wasn't
So it's not like she was going, is it Christmas? Oh my gosh, we need to do something.
Yes.
So prior to her really advancing in the last 3-4 years, I would try to be more, but it'd be more about her anxiety. She'd go, well, did I get you something? It's your birthday? And I would go, yes.
Yeah.
Then she stopped asking. So there was a pressure that was not there for her that didn't create more anxiety because it was a special occasion. So holidays had changed dramatically for us already. And I know I'm not going to ignore the fact that if a holiday comes up, there's not going to be something there. But I'm confident I won't overreact to it as much as I would if we were still kind of
actively,
in that.
yeah. And I think that was very, very smart and intelligent of you, because we try to hold on to so many traditions when it comes to holidays and family gatherings and just, you know.
Well,
our
and traditions were more about her
yeah.
and less about me because I'm not big into the holidays. It's not because they're depressing. It's just not. I'd say Thanksgiving was more depressing for me because I hated going and doing that whole family thing, and I had to do so there was. I
You're
just
like,
wanted
it's
to.
not fun in that
It
part.
wasn't. You know, the family doesn't really make it fun. There's pressure to get the turkey. I was just like, oh, let's just order pizza. So. Traditions really weren't handed down to me, but they were still important to Mom. And when they became not important, that gave me some relief that I
gave you
didn't
a
have to go
relief, yes.
over-decorate the house because she over-decorated, and she was totally into it. So not having that was helpful for me to make that adjustment.
Yeah, so I still, you know, because I love you, want you to pay attention, because you still have like those memories of how she was at holidays, and we don't know how grief will affect us. And you always have a plan. I know you.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
your plan.
Well, I went on a walk one morning, and I just, as I was being praiseworthy to God for the many blessings in her life and my life and our life together, I was like, I knew holidays were coming up, and I know that they'd play some tricks on me. I realized that, and I'm ready to kind of just approach the feelings and feel them as I'm
Yes.
learning in grief, not ignore them.
Yes.
Doesn't mean I'm going to collapse. Now, when you start crying at the very beginning of the grief, I understand now, being part of that grief, why a lot of people avoid crying. Now, it's not easy for me to avoid crying, but goodness, I cried. I think I texted you a couple times where I was like, it's going to rip my guts out. I'm crying so hard. And it just gave me a headache, and I was like, oh, I don't want to just cry like this all the time. So, so that morning I just said, God, whoever the first person who invites me over to their house for Thanksgiving, I'll say yes to. And so my neighbors had me over that afternoon just to visit and catch up and see how I was doing. And they said, well, what are you doing for Thanksgiving? I said, well, I'm coming over here, I guess. So that's been, taken care of. And that's great because, again, Thanksgiving's not one that I
And you
cherish.
don't have to wash dishes.
Well, and I can just walk next door and walk back.
Yeah, you don't have to drive or
And
wash
have my
dishes.
quiet time.
Yes. So, you inspire me. You've mentored me through so many things, as well as like people dealing with their loved ones and are caregivers and trying to decide when to stop working. Like, you have been so transparent. And I'm pretty sure you didn't sign up for that part. You are a storyteller.
Right.
And how you made the decision to just like share your story.
I think out of self-preservation at the beginning. We had just come out of COVID. I had started, didn't I already start my podcast while no, probably 2021.
2021.
So I had not even thought of a podcast. I didn't listen to podcasts. And I felt like God was encouraging me to look into doing a podcast. And I was like, okay. And within a month, I was doing a podcast. And first of all, I needed it for me. I was going to be home with Mom full time, so I wasn't going to be able to travel around as much. And I'd already had such great resources and connections like you and others, and I wanted to learn more while we still were on the journey together, and I wanted to share that journey as well. I did a lot of stuff on my social as well, so I had a lot of followers that way, and then being on TV for a little stint, I was able to communicate that on the air, on TV, and where I was in my life, and was able to share that. So it was all happening organically.
Mm-hmm.
But the having someone, and at first, I was like I was doing a podcast a week.
Yes, you were.
I was like anxious, eager, curious, and then I slowed down, but I had such great people that I had met through meetings like that your organization would have, and anyone else that I always met somebody and I was like, God, you want to do the podcast? Yeah, that makes sense what you do, helping people move. Mm-hmm. It's like there was always something there to share with people. So I did that for several years. It was that feeling, that intuition of knowing this year was going to be different, but it hadn't been different yet, right? I knew Mom had been diagnosed with a blood disease, but I had no idea what that meant. All I was focused on was Alzheimer's, but I was sensitive to it and realized that it was affecting her breathing, and she got tired real easy. So I decided, I didn't decide, I always have to rely on the Holy Spirit for all of my guidance, and I always have, is that I needed to stop the podcast for a while and pay attention, be more present with Mom.
And I think one episode we were recording. So, on a timeline when I first started coming over, you could tell her, like, I'm about to do the podcast, Mom. We talk for a minute. She'd go to her room, and watch TV, play with the cats, and she would be okay.
Yeah, sometimes she'd come in and bust us.
Yeah, but not often.
Because she was just curious.
But the closer we got to when you were deciding to, like, she started to walk in more. Needed a little bit more attention and, like, curious about what was going on and just being around.
Because the reality is she didn't remember, obviously, where we were, and she would get up to find me is what
she would be looking for you and just did not like to be alone in that part. So, let's talk about it. We could be here all day because we've done this, but some parts that's really important to caregivers and family members taking care of their loved ones. Talk about respite, because I had to talk you into respite.
Right, because we did it at the last minute for
Yes.
Dad, because to be honest with you, I didn't understand hospice. Mm-hmm. I understood hospice for my grandmother, but I didn't understand hospice. And we were late in the game getting my dad, and I wish some of the people that came and just sat with him, not from hospice, but had mentioned hospice, but it wasn't until his doctor said, it's time for hospice. And
that was really kind of late.
So late. She anticipated 6 months. My dad, by the time we registered, he died 10 days later.
Yeah.
So she was aware what she was seeing was serious when we all went to the doctor. And me, I was just like, okay, I'll take care of that, even though I had not a clue.
Yes.
So we went through the 3 different kind of appointments that you have, and you become a client, and Dad became a client on Friday. He was in hospice care so we were using it as respite because you have 5 days respite, right?
Yes.
Now this is talking about hospice, but the first thing I started to do was go ahead and hire somebody to come and sit with her because I just was not comfortable when I would go to Bible study,
Yeah,
women's
you
Bible
that and
study.
that was a transition because you alone had been her primary person. So
Correct.
you making a decision that, ooh, I think I'm gonna have to bring somebody in.
Right.
That was kind of difficult.
Right, because you never know how your loved one's going to react. My mom trusts me, she loves me, but you introduce somebody new, and all she knew was me there, but it went really well. I was so happy. I wasn't surprised, but once again, God provided the perfect person for that. And mom enjoyed her. And so that helped me go and be part of the women's Bible study for a couple hours instead of just rushing over there and rushing back. But it also allowed me opportunities to have lunch with friends. So I began to use respite a little bit more instead of just going to Bible study and back. Yes, I'd go to the store, but also when I realized I needed possibly to do something else on a different day, I could call this person if they were available, and I felt really comfortable. And mom and her had already established a relationship. She was a retired nurse and a lovely soul, and she taught me stuff. She was very calm, and I was hyper, so she helped calm me down. So she gave me some great tips on how to do this and that to help mom, and so it was a wonderful match, and I was grateful for that. So that was the first time I started to understand respite, or understand the importance of it for myself, to do for myself, not just hire somebody so you can go to the doctor. So then the next step would be through you understanding that there was grant money to hire care if you needed it, if you're struggling financially. Because once your loved one starts to take a very drastic turn, it's not just one day a week.
It's not.
So the other respite, so I was able to apply for some grant monies and encourage other people to do that. It was very easy through the Alzheimer's Arkansas, and felt supported, once again, on a financial basis. But again, you're always, as a caregiver, wondering when you're going to have to pull the trigger more, because you're going to need more help physically. My mother was getting to where I was wheeling her around. She could not walk. But by the time we went ahead and there was probably part of me that when her doctor recommended hospice, I was like, okay, it's going to be tomorrow. She is going to pass tomorrow.
I think that's so the myth and what we seem to understand. So it depends on when you start to receive the services. Because I think most people, kind of like your dad, when the doctor says, I think it's time, it's really time. Like it should have been time 6 months ago, maybe.
Yeah, probably if he had already had a hospice nurse, she would have seen that he was starting terminal agitation. It wasn't until we took him to see his elder care doctor, she was like, she doesn't see him all the time.
Yes.
So, but we took him because he had significant changes, and she was able to register very quickly, seeing him physically. It's going to be 6 months. It was 10 days later. By the time we had him as a client, it was 6 months for mom. So,
Yes.
So I knew that they had the different diseases. So even though I didn't think it was going to be 10 days from the time she said that, that was part of my trauma, my trigger. I was like, when a doctor suggests. So I was feeling a little defeated when she said it, and maybe a little ticked off at her. And once again, God's provision, because she became a hospice client and then got a terrible UTI, and I had a caregiver still coming, but wow, it got into her kidney very fast. So thankful that they were there to help get me through that.
Yeah. And so you didn't have to hospitalize her for
No.
that. So there's some amazing services in that. So when we think about, I didn't sign up for it. So although in some way you didn't sign up to be a caregiver for two parents at the same time, and the respite part, I think when I first met you, you was just like, I could do this all the time. I'm going to be able to do this. Like,
Yeah.
I got this. So understanding how even respite, you didn't really want to sign up for it, but we kind of talked you into it, and
Right.
it worked out well. And the grief part of nobody signs up for grief. We try to prepare ourselves for the grief that we don't even know that's to come and how it will come. So I want to thank you, Theba, for sharing your story. And if there's anything that you would like to say to our listening audience today, to give them, encourage them, maybe some words of wisdom, please share that now.
Yeah, I have several. Okay. The first is if you're a and I believe most of the listeners are caregivers right now. Their loved one has not yet passed. So be aware of anticipatory grief. Do a little reading on it. Don't wig yourself out about it, but just know you are going through it. So I just, I had people tell me that. At least it was on my mind, right? Did I know how to approach it? No, but it was always on my mind because it made sense. You were grieving. So do what you can to take care of getting some knowledge about what that looks like, how maybe you can get some tools to begin the process of handling that. The other is, more than likely, you're going to be like me and think you can do it till the end. And you can until you can't.
Yes.
But I had already set in place, again, based on some great feedback from people, doctor, you, others, to get respite. Go ahead and get that situated, have somebody, so when you do need someone more and more to help you, you have that in line and your mother's already used to it or your father's already used to it, so that's helpful. So that routine won't be as dramatic. So know that, and then also be ready that when they do pass, go ahead and get into a group of some kind and get a better understanding of grief. Don't ignore it. Don't think it's going to kill you. It will not. It just feels that way sometimes. But the more you lean into that, the I'm not going to say the easier, but the more manageable your grief moments, because it does come whenever it wants to, however it wants to. And if you're aware that it's going to happen in these waves, that you have no control of it, because I always knew, and you probably knew this about me, I like to get things done. I like to try to be proactive and productive. I was not going to be able to control grief.
No.
And I was not as ready for it as I thought I was. And though my mother was ready to go be with Jesus, and I knew that was the best outcome of this, and that it still makes it difficult. Because for a caregiver, I'm also having to adjust not caring for her. Now I'm just...
Empty spaces in your life.
Exactly. And that you will, more than you think, be physically exhausted, and more than likely it's just going to happen. You're going to realize, oh my gosh, I can't do this anymore, or I've got to get some help, more than I have now, because I'm not sleeping. You don't realize you're not sleeping. You're always, you have your mind going, and your
Ears are always active,
yes,
listening.
because she's up, she's walking. And my main goal was not to fall. It was my main purpose. I've got to keep her safe from falling. So then you start to make more drastic decisions, like hospice home care more. I got her a hospice home bed to protect her at night. But then you realize you're the one having to get up with her, and you're great that she's not going to fall, but you're still getting up with her 3 or 4 times a night to go to the bathroom. So I physically just could not deal with it, the emotions and all of it. And there was just a moment where I hit the wall, and that's okay, because God provided after that as well. And put her in hospice for respite.
Yes.
5 days. Did not expect her to stay. I did expect her to come back. That's going to give us both some rest.
Yes.
She died on the 5th day. So I was like, whoa, that's timing.
It was time. God's timing is perfect.
I love telling this story, and I told you she was going to be a mom till the very end. They did call me and tell me that it would be soon, and by the time I got there, she had already passed, and it's so endearing for me to think about. But she was probably, Theba's on her way. Jesus, let's go ahead and make the trip because she's going to have a come apart if she sees me take my last breath. And she's probably right. Yes, I handled Dad's last breath. I saw Grandma take her last breath, but Mom's different. So I could just see her, just like once the nurse probably whispered into her, "Hey, your daughter's on her way." Even though she's unconscious, she was like, "Oh, let's go. Come on, fast trip it. Fast trip." And so by the time I got there, I was like, "Is she gone?" And then, she's like, "Yeah, she just left." And I was like, "Oh, okay." It wasn't something sacred that I wanted to see.
Yes.
But I was like, "Oh, well, that would just be like her. Mom till the
I
end."
love it. So I want to thank you, Theba, for your transparency. You are in my prayers, and always just a phone call or a text away. I want to thank each of you for joining this month's I Did Not Sign Up for This with Alzheimer's Arkansas, sponsored by Elder Independence Home Care. Until the next time, I didn't sign up for this.
Thank you.
Thank you. Subscribe, review, and share this podcast. Thank you to Elder Independence for underwriting. I did not sign up for this. Until next time.